In this lesson, we'll learn how we can control the stacking order of vector objects in our artwork, as well as organize our objects into groups. Okay, so I've got the project file for lesson 9 begin open in front of me here. If you want to open that up and follow along. So now that we understand what makes up vector artwork, and we understand some basic tools that we can use to create and edit our vector artwork, it should have become apparent to you by now that inherently there's a stacking order of art that's important when assembling this artwork. So as we can see here in front of me, I've taken our Mo Television logo and I've sort of messed it up a little bit here. I've moved some of the objects around. Now, in looking at this, if I were to say zoom in on this artwork, you can see that there are some of these objects that are behind other ones, while other ones are in front of other ones. So as you can see, the M is behind this little black line right here of the television, and the O is actually on top of that same line. So there is a stacking order that's very important when dealing with vector objects. Now, inside Adobe Illustrator, it's actually very simple to control this stacking order, and we can do that a couple of different ways. So let's come over here first and select this letter O, for example, here. And I'm going to come up here to the Object menu and look under this Arrangement submenu here. And you can see there are some options here. We can either bring this selected object to the front, we can bring it forward, we can send it backwards, or we can send it to the back. Now, there are 4 options here, but really 2 of these may sound very similar. While these first 2 may sound very similar, while these 3rd and 4th options may also sound very similar in nature. So the easiest way to understand these, the stacking order of these objects, is to imagine that you've got several pieces of paper scattered around your desk. Now, one of those pieces of paper is on the top of the stack, and one of those pieces of paper is on the bottom. Now, if you have more than 2 sheets of paper on your desk, then you also have some pieces of paper that are in between those 2 sheets. Now, we can look at our vector objects in much the same way. So let's just pretend that, let's come over here and select this M. Let's pretend this is the sheet of paper that's on the very bottom of our stack of paper. Now, if we wanted to bring this M to the very top of our stack, we could come over here and choose this Bring to Front option. That will move this M all the way to the top of our stacking order. Now, if we just wanted to take this M and we wanted to move it up 1 position in that stacking order, then we could choose this Bring Forward option here. Now, the same is going to work for Send Backwards and Send Back. Now, if we wanted to send it backwards 1 place, we would choose this Send Backward option. If we wanted to send it all the way to the back of the stack, then we could choose this Send to Back option. Now, the reason I start with these 4 options here is because these are probably the most common ways that I use to control the arrangement of my vector objects. Quite simply because there are keyboard shortcuts assigned to these. You can see here, Bring to Front is Shift, Control, and close bracket. Bring Forward is simply Control bracket. Send backwards is Control open bracket here. And Send to Back is Shift Control open bracket. So these are very, very simple keyboard shortcuts to remember. So just knowing that if we wanted to send it all the way to the back or all the way to the front, we just simply add the Shift key to that keyboard combination. So let me give you a little bit of a visual here. So if I were to come over here to my panel dock on the right of the interface, I'm going to grab this one that looks like 2 sheets of paper that are stacked on top of one another. Now, inside Illustrator, this icon indicates the Layers panel. And you can see here, once I've expanded that out, we've got here a layer that is actually titled Mo. So all of the objects that make up this logo live inside this layer. If we were to click on this arrow right here, you can see that that layer twirls down, and we can see the entirety of the contents of that layer. We have things like compound path, we even have something called a group here. Now, we're going to talk about groups here in just a moment. Now, observe really quickly on my artboard, I currently don't have anything selected. Let me just click on this O. Notice what happens here. when I click on this O and select it, this compound path object right here gets selected with a large red square, and the Mo layer receives a small red square. Now, if we were to grab and drag a selection around all of these objects here, you'll notice that they all receive the large red square, but now the square on top of or rather to the right of the Mo layer is also large. That indicates that we have everything on that layer selected. So if we just select one of these items, like the M here, you'll see that the big square is here and the little square is here. Now, this group right here is actually the word television. So if I were to click on this group, you'll see that all the letters in the word television get selected, and our group gets selected here. Now, if we wanted to, say, move this M on top of this black line right here, we could come over here and choose that Bring to Front option, or use the keyboard shortcut for it, or we could simply come over here and grab that layer, and we'll just move that up in the stacking order here. And you can see here that just simply by clicking and dragging, I was able to reposition that M in the stacking order of objects that live on this Mo layer. Now, we could even come over here and select multiple objects just by holding down the Shift key and clicking to the right of this little circle here. So you can see that right now I've got all of these objects selected. And I did that using the Layers panel. Now, is there a right way or a wrong way to select and adjust the arrangement of your vector objects? Not really. It's all about your preference. I know artists that prefer to use exclusively the Layers panel, and I also know artists that really avoid the Layers panel and choose to use keyboard shortcuts to manage that. So it's important to understand that there are really a couple different ways you can manage this arrangement, though, using either those keyboard shortcuts or the Layers panel here. Now, really quickly, let's go ahead and talk about groups for a moment. We know that we have all these individual vector objects here, but yet we have one of these objects which is really multiple objects, and it's saved as a group. You can see in the Layers panel, if I twirl that arrow down, you'll see a vector object for each one of the letter forms in that group. Now, a group is just simply a way to lock objects together or group them together. And we can do that if we were to maybe hold down Shift and select the M and the O here by coming up here to Object and choosing the Group option. You can see the keyboard shortcut for that is Control G. If I were to do that, you'll see that a new group is created over here in my Layers panel. We also know that we have a group because we have those selected, and it says so right over here in the Control panel, as well as in the Appearance panel. It'll tell us that we're working with a group. But we can also, again, manage this group inside the Layers panel. My personal preference in creating groups is to use the keyboard shortcut Control G, because we can easily use the keyboard shortcut Control Shift G to ungroup the object, or rather the group. So if I were to select that group, we can come up here and choose Ungroup right there, and that's going to actually ungroup those objects. So let's go ahead and select these objects here and group them together, because I want to show you one last thing in regards to managing or editing your groups. And this is a feature built into Illustrator known as isolation mode. So right now we have an entire group selected. Let's say we wanted to change the position of this O right here. We wanted to move it down. But we don't want to ungroup these objects. Well, there's a couple ways we could go about doing that. We could come over here in our Layers panel, drill down inside our Layers panel until we find the object and select just the O object here inside that group. Or we can come over here and simply select our group, and I'm going to double click on the group. Now, there are some subtle changes that took place in the UI here inside of Illustrator. So notice first that we have this gray bar that appeared across the top of our document. Our Layers panel also changed, and now we have a top layer here named Isolation Mode. So this is a feature built into Illustrator that lets us manage the contents of a group. So if we were to look up here in this gray bar, you'll see here we have a little back arrow, so we could click that and we could step back within that group. If we drill down, say we have a group that lives inside a group, we can move within our Layers panel one step at a time to back out of isolation mode. But over here we have the name of our group. In this case, it is group. And then we have the layer that that group lives on. So you can see here that was on the Mo layer. And again, like we talked about before, we have the back button. So now inside of isolation mode, we can come in and we can select each one of these different objects that live in the group. We can change positions if we wanted to maybe drag that one down to right about there. But notice that we can't select any of these objects that are not in the group. That is until we leave isolation mode. So again, like I said before, we could back out one step at a time, just like so. Or if we double click there, we could simply double click away from our group. So I'll just double click, and again, you can see that we've exited out of isolation mode. So in this lesson, we've learned how to control the arrangement and layering of our vector objects. We've also learned how to organize our objects into groups. Now at this point, let's go ahead and move on to the final lesson in this course, where we're going to look at taking a raster object and converting it into a vector object.